Emily knelt in her backyard garden, her gloved hands buried in the soil as she pulled weeds that had crept between her rows of flowers. The morning was bright, the kind of morning where the air felt crisp and alive, and the quiet hum of bees carried across the yard. Gardening had always been her escape. When the house felt too heavy, when her husband was gone too long at work, when her children barely came around anymore, this little square of earth gave her peace. She leaned back on her heels, wiping her forehead with the back of her arm, leaving a streak of dirt across her skin. The garden was alive with colors: roses, tulips, marigolds, but Emily's thoughts drifted elsewhere. She thought about how quiet her life had become. She thought about the conversations she no longer had with her husband, the way the nights felt long even when he was there. She shook the thought away, forcing herself to focus on the weeds in front of her. She bent forward again, reaching deep into the soil, her breath slow and steady, and then she heard it. Footsteps, soft, steady, coming from behind her on the gravel path. Her body stiffened instantly. Her hands froze in the dirt. For a moment, the only sound was the beating of her heart in her chest, loud and uneven. She swallowed hard, her mind racing. It wasn't her husband's walk he would have called out her name. It wasn't the mailman either. They never came around this side of the house. Emily turned slowly. Her breath caught somewhere between her throat and her chest. And there he was, Daniel, her neighbor. He stood just a few feet behind her, the morning sun casting a glow around him. His hands were tucked loosely into the pockets of his jeans, his posture casual, but his eyes fixed on her with a softness that made her chest tighten. She let out a small breath, trying to steady herself. "Daniel," she said, her voice a little unsteady, "you startled me." He gave a small smile, almost shy, though there was something behind it, something deeper. "Sorry," he said, his tone quiet and careful. "I didn't mean to sneak up on you. I just saw you out here, and I guess I stopped without thinking." Emily pulled off one of her gloves and brushed soil from her hands, trying to appear calm though her pulse hadn't slowed. "Well, you did scare me," she said with a small laugh, though the sound felt nervous even to her own ears. Daniel's gaze shifted briefly to the flowers, then back to her. "You've made this place beautiful," he said. His words weren't casual. They carried a weight, as if he meant more than the flowers, more than the soil. "Honestly, I've walked past so many times hoping you'd be out here. It feels different when you are." Mice. Breath caught again. She didn't know how to respond. Compliments had become rare in her life. Her husband hardly noticed her garden anymore. And he certainly didn't stop to admire the way she looked kneeling among the roses. And yet here was Daniel, standing there, noticing everything. She forced a smile, trying to push away the warmth rising in her chest. "It's just a hobby," she said quickly. "Something to keep me busy." Daniel took a small step closer, though he still kept a respectful distance. His eyes held hers, steady but gentle. "I think it's more than that," he said. "You put care into it. You can see it in the details." Emily felt her throat tighten. She wasn't used to being seen like this, not for years. She turned her eyes back to the soil, hoping he wouldn't notice the way her hands trembled slightly. "Well," she said softly, "gardens grow when you give them time. That's all." There was a pause. The air between them seemed to thicken, though neither of them spoke. Emily could feel the tension, unspoken but heavy, resting in the space that hung between them. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. "I should let you get back to it," he said, though his voice didn't sound eager to leave. "I didn't mean to bother you." Emily looked back at him, searching his expression. There was something in his eyes, something quiet but undeniable. She felt her heart pound harder. She wanted to say something, anything, but the words tangled inside her. All she could manage was a small nod. Daniel hesitated a moment longer, as if waiting for her to ask him to stay. When she didn't, he gave another faint smile, softer this time, almost regretful. "Well," he said quietly, "I'll see you around." And with that, he turned and walked back down the gravel path, his footsteps fading until the garden was silent again. Emily stood frozen, her hands resting uselessly at her sides. Her heart hadn't slowed. She looked back at her flowers, but they felt different now, as if the garden itself had changed in the space of a few minutes. She bent back down to the soil, trying to return to the task she had left, but her thoughts wouldn't settle. She couldn't stop hearing his voice. "You deserve to be seen." The words lingered in her mind, though he hadn't said them aloud yet. But she had felt them in his eyes, in the way he had stood there as though noticing her wasn't something he could hide. She tried to focus on the weeds, on the simple comfort of the soil in her hands, but it was no use. Her heart had already betrayed her. The morning sun kept rising, but Emily's world no longer felt the same. Something had shifted, something she couldn't name, but she knew deep down that it wasn't going away. She sat back on her heels again, staring at the roses, and realized with a mixture of fear and longing that she would be waiting to hear those footsteps again. Emily brushed the dirt from her hands and slipped off her gloves, letting the cool air touch her skin. Daniel's sudden visit still lingered in her chest, and though she wanted to forget it, she couldn't. The next morning, she found herself moving slower through the house, almost waiting for something to distract her thoughts. She made coffee, stared out the window, and caught herself glancing toward the path that led past her garden. Nothing, just stillness by the afternoon. She was back outside, kneeling once more in the soil. The rhythm of pulling weeds calmed her, but her mind refused to settle. She thought about Daniel's words, how he had noticed the garden, how he had noticed her. It had been years since anyone spoke to her like that, with real attention, as if what she did mattered. She shook her head, reminding herself it was just a conversation. But deep inside, she knew it wasn't. She heard footsteps again. Her breath tightened. Slowly, she looked up, and there he was, standing at the edge of the yard with that same soft smile. "Back at it again," Daniel said, his voice easy, as if they were old friends. Emily straightened up, brushing dirt from her knees. "Yes," she answered lightly, though her pulse quickened. "The weeds don't wait for anyone." He walked closer this time, stopping a few feet away. "I didn't mean to bother you yesterday," he said, "but I was glad I stopped. It felt good to talk." Emily shifted her weight, unsure what to say. She could feel his sincerity, and it unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. "It was just small talk," she replied quickly. Though her tone didn't sound convincing, Daniel tilted his head slightly, studying her. "I don't think it was just that." His words landed heavier than she expected. Emily forced herself to turn back to her flowers, hoping the soil would distract her. "You're reading too much into it," she said softly. But Daniel didn't leave. He stepped closer, his voice quieter, almost hesitant. "I'm sorry if this sounds strange, Emily, but sometimes I notice things. The way you work here, the way you take care of everything. I can tell this garden means something to you. And I just—" He stopped, pressing his lips together as if holding back more. Emily finally met his eyes. There was no playfulness there, no careless charm, just honesty. It unsettled her in ways she hadn't prepared for. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because," he said gently, "I think you deserve to be told. You deserve to be seen." Her throat tightened. Those words pierced straight through her, reaching the part of her heart that had been starved of such attention for years. She wanted to argue, to dismiss it, but the truth was too sharp. Her husband's voice echoed in her memory. Short, distracted, often spoken with one eye on his phone or his laptop. And now here was Daniel, speaking as if every word mattered. Emily turned quickly back to her garden, desperate to hide the storm building inside her. "Daniel, you shouldn't say things like that," she said firmly, though her voice wavered. He stepped back slightly, giving her space, his expression softening. "I didn't mean to cross a line. I just wanted you to know what I see." Silence filled the yard. The only sound was the rustle of leaves in the breeze. Emily knelt again, her hands moving through the soil, though her thoughts were far from her flowers. She could feel his presence still, standing there, waiting for her to say something. Finally, she exhaled, her voice steadier. "You're kind, Daniel, but maybe it's better if you don't say things that complicate things." He nodded slowly, though the regret in his eyes was clear. "I understand," he said softly. "I'll stop." And yet, even as he said it, Emily could see the truth in his gaze. He couldn't stop noticing. And she couldn't stop feeling the weight of his attention. She forced herself to smile politely, though it felt weak. "Thank you," she whispered. Daniel lingered a moment longer, as if searching for words that wouldn't come. Then he finally stepped back. "All right," he said gently. "I'll leave you to your garden." He turned and walked away, his steps slow, his figure fading down the path. Emily kept her eyes fixed on the flowers, her hands digging harder into the soil, as if she could bury her thoughts with the weeds. But when the yard grew quiet again, her heart wouldn't settle. His words replayed in her mind over and over. "You deserve to be seen." That night, Emily lay in bed beside her husband, the silence between them louder than usual. He scrolled on his phone, mumbling about a meeting he had tomorrow, barely looking her way. She nodded along, her body still, but her mind wasn't with him. It was back in the garden, standing in the sunlight with Daniel's eyes on hers, hearing words she had longed to hear but never expected. She turned on her side, closing her eyes tightly, trying to chase the thought away. But it clung to her, settling deep inside her chest. The next morning, she avoided the garden. She cleaned the kitchen, folded laundry, anything to keep her from stepping outside. But by afternoon, her resolve broke. She found herself standing at the garden's edge, staring at the rows of flowers as if they held answers. She told herself she was only there for the plants, for the routine. But deep down, she knew the truth. She was waiting. And when she finally heard the sound of footsteps again, her heart leaped before her mind could stop it. She froze, her breath shallow. Slowly, she turned her head. Daniel was there. He didn't speak right away. He just looked at her with the same steady eyes, as if the silence between them said everything words couldn't. Emily's chest tightened. She didn't know if she was afraid of him or afraid of herself. Emily tried to convince herself that Daniel's visits meant nothing. She told herself it was neighborly kindness, nothing more. But her heart refused to believe the lie. Every time she stepped into the garden, she felt a strange pull, a quiet expectation. Her hands worked the soil, but her eyes flickered toward the path, waiting for footsteps she both dreaded and longed for. And then he came. It started small, a shadow at the edge of her yard, a soft hello that sent her pulse racing. She answered lightly, pretending it was ordinary, but it never felt ordinary. Daniel's presence shifted the air itself, made her aware of every movement, every word, every glance. At first, their conversations stayed safe. He asked about her flowers, and she explained which blooms thrived in the changing seasons. He admired her roses, and she taught him how to prune carefully. She thought if she kept things practical, it would keep her heart safe. But with Daniel, even silence felt like a conversation. One afternoon, she was trimming the lavender when he appeared again. This time, he stayed longer. He leaned against the wooden fence, his eyes following her movements. "You're out here almost every day," Kay said softly. Emily smiled faintly without looking up. "It keeps me busy." "Or maybe," he said carefully, "it keeps you company." Her hands froze around the shears. The truth of his words hit too close. She glanced at him, her throat tight. "What do you mean by that?" He hesitated, then stepped closer, his tone gentle but steady. "I mean, sometimes I wonder if you feel the same silence I do. The kind that isn't about being alone, but about not being noticed." Her chest tightened. She wanted to stop him, to remind him he was saying too much, but her heart betrayed her. She understood exactly what he meant, because she lived it. Emily turned quickly, returning to her plants. "Daniel, you shouldn't say things like that," she murmured. But he didn't leave. His voice softened, almost pleading. "I'm sorry. I notice. I see how much care you put into everything. And sometimes I wonder if anyone else notices." Emily's hands trembled, though she tried to steady them. His words weren't grand declarations, but they cut deeper than anything she had heard in years. She tried to respond, but the words tangled inside her. Finally, she whispered, "You don't know what you're talking about." Daniel's gaze lingered, searching her expression. "Maybe I do," he said quietly. The silence that followed was heavy, pressing down on both of them. Emily's heart pounded so loudly she was certain he could hear it. She wanted him to step back, to leave, to let her breathe. But another part of her thought, part she couldn't admit, wanted him to stay. When he finally moved, it wasn't away. He knelt beside the flower bed, his hand brushing the soil. "Teach me," he said suddenly. Emily blinked. "Teach you? How to care for them. For the roses, the lavender. I'd like to learn." She stared at him, unsure if it was an excuse to be near her, or if he was sincere. But the hope in his eyes was undeniable. Against her better judgment, she nodded. "All right," she said quietly. And so it began. The days blurred into a rhythm. Daniel started stopping by more often, and each time he stayed longer. She showed him how to water the roots instead of the leaves, how to cut away the dead blooms so new ones could grow. He listened intently, his focus never wavering. Sometimes he would ask questions just to keep her talking. But it wasn't only about the garden anymore. Soon, their conversations drifted into other corners of life. He asked about her favorite books, and she confessed she hadn't read much in years. He told her about the long hours he worked at his job, how he often came home to an empty house. And when he asked her if she ever felt invisible, she couldn't lie. She whispered, yes. The honesty between them grew like wildflowers and planned, uninvited but impossible to stop. One late afternoon, the sun dipped low, painting the sky with streaks of orange and pink. Emily stood beside the roses, the scent heavy in the warm air. Daniel lingered close, his gaze not on the flowers but on her. "You've changed this place," he said softly. Emily frowned slightly. "The garden." "No," he replied, his voice low. "You've changed mine." Her breath caught. She turned to him, her heart hammering, unsure if she had heard him right. But the way his eyes held hers left no doubt. The world felt suspended, caught between what was right and what was undeniable. Emily stepped back, her hands gripping the edge of the wooden fence. "Daniel, you can't." "I know." He interrupted gently. "I know I shouldn't, but I can't help it. You matter to me, Emily, more than I thought you would." Her chest ached with longing and fear all at once. She wanted to deny him, to tell him he was wrong. But the truth was burning inside her. She felt it too. She looked away quickly, her voice barely steady. "This isn't fair." "No," he said softly. "It isn't, but it's real." The air between them was thick, charged with everything they couldn't say. Emily's heart raced as she searched for words, but none came. The only sound was the faint rustle of leaves in the evening breeze. Finally, she whispered, "You should go." Daniel's expression shifted, torn between wanting to stay and knowing he shouldn't. After a long moment, he nodded slowly. "All right," he said quietly. But before he turned, he added, "Just know, I'll be here, even if I don't say it." And then he walked away, his figure fading into the shadows of the setting sun. Emily stood frozen, her breath uneven. The roses around her seemed brighter, sharper, as if the world itself had shifted. She pressed her hand against her chest, trying to calm the storm inside her. But it was no use. She knew she had crossed an invisible line. Maybe not with words, maybe not with touch, but with her heart. And there was no turning back. That night she lay awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling. Her husband asleep beside her. She thought of Daniel's eyes, his voice, the way he had said she mattered. Her chest ached with guilt. But beneath it was something even stronger. Longing. By the time morning came, she already knew the truth. No matter how hard she tried to deny it, she would find herself back in the garden. And when Daniel came again, she wouldn't be able to pretend anymore. The evening sky was painted in shades of gold and deep purple when Emily found herself kneeling again in the garden. Her hands moved through the soil, but her thoughts were restless. The roses swayed gently in the breeze, the air warm with the fading light. She told herself she was only here for the plants, that it had nothing to do with him. But deep down, she knew the truth. She was waiting. She heard it before she saw him. The familiar sound of footsteps on the gravel path behind her. Her body stiffened, her heart racing the same way it had the very first time. She froze, afraid to turn, afraid of what she wanted, and afraid of what it meant. Slowly, she lifted her head, and there he was, Daniel. He stood a few feet away, his face softened by the glow of the setting sun. His hands were loose at his sides, but his eyes were fixed on her as though the whole world had narrowed down to this moment. Neither of them spoke right away. The silence wrapped around them, heavy and alive. Emily finally stood, brushing dirt from her hands, though they still trembled. "You're here again," she said, her voice barely steady. Daniel gave a small nod. "I couldn't stay away." Her throat tightened. She wanted to be angry, to push him back into the safe distance of neighborly politeness, but her heart betrayed her. She had been waiting for those words, though she would never admit it. "Daniel," she whispered, "you shouldn't." He stepped closer, slowly, carefully, as if afraid of breaking something fragile. His voice was low, steady, but filled with something she had never heard from him before. "Emily, do you ever wonder if we're meant to feel more than we allow ourselves to?" Her breath caught. The question hung between them, impossible to ignore. She opened her mouth to respond, but the words dissolved before they reached her lips, because the truth was already burning inside her. Yes. She did wonder. She had wondered every night since their first conversation. Her chest ached as she shook her head. "You can't say things like that. It's wrong." Daniel didn't move closer, but his eyes never left hers. "I know," he said quietly. "I know the lines. I know what's at risk. But I also know how I feel, and I can't pretend anymore." The honesty in his words made her knees weak. She wanted to step back, to put space between them, but instead she found herself rooted to the spot. Her heart pounded, her breath uneven, as if her body had already made the choice. Her mind refused to accept. Emily turned away, her gaze falling to the roses at her feet. "I have a life," she said softly. "A family. I can't cross that line." "I'm not asking you to," Daniel replied gently. "I'm only asking you to admit that you feel it too. Because I see it, Emily. I see it every time you look at me." Tears stung her eyes, though she tried to hold them back. She hated how right he was. She hated how much she wanted to say yes. But admitting it out loud felt like stepping off a cliff with no ground below. "Even if I did," she whispered, "what good would it do?" Daniel's voice softened even more. "It would mean you're not alone. That someone sees you, really sees you. Isn't that something?" Her chest broke open at his words. For years, she had been moving through her life unseen, unheard, her heart buried under routines and responsibilities. And here he was offering her the thing she had secretly longed for. The thing she had convinced herself she no longer needed. Emily turned back toward him, her eyes wet, her breath shaking. "You don't understand what you're asking of me." "I'm not asking," he said, his voice steady. "I just needed you to know. Because keeping it in feels like lying. And I can't lie when it comes to you." The silence that followed felt endless. The world around them seemed to fade, the hum of crickets, the distant sound of cars, even the whisper of the breeze. All that remained was the space between them, charged and fragile. Emily's heart screamed to close the distance, to let herself fall into the warmth he offered. But her mind held her back, reminding her of the vows she had made, the life she had built, the consequences she couldn't ignore. She stood torn in two, her soul pulled in opposite directions. Finally, she whispered, "Daniel, please, don't make this harder." His eyes softened, full of understanding and pain all at once. "I never wanted to hurt you. I just wanted you to know the truth." He took one slow step closer, close enough that she could feel the heat of his presence, but not enough to touch. He looked at her as if memorizing her face, as if this moment was all he would ever get. "If this is the last time I say it," he whispered, "then let me say it once more. You matter to me, Emily, more than I can explain." Her breath shook as tears slid down her cheeks. She didn't move, didn't stop him, didn't push him away. She only stood there, caught in the ache of everything she wanted and everything she feared. And then, slowly, Daniel stepped back. His eyes lingered on hers for one last moment before he turned toward the path. His footsteps were quiet, fading into the dusk, leaving behind a silence so heavy it pressed against her chest. Emily sank to her knees in the garden, her hands resting in the soil, her tears falling freely now. The roses blurred in her vision, but their scent surrounded her, sweet and overwhelming. She knew nothing would ever be the same again. Whether she chose to bury these feelings or let them grow, her life had already changed. Daniel had spoken the truth out loud, and in doing so, he had awakened something inside her she could no longer deny. As the night fell, Emily stayed in the garden, the darkness wrapping around her. Her heart was torn between duty and desire, between the safety of what she knew and the danger of what she wanted, and though she told herself she would choose the safe path, deep down she knew this story wasn't over. Asterisk, asterisk.